If you can still do these 5 things, you're aging better than most people your age. And I don't mean push-ups or touching your toes. These are 5 things nobody measures and nobody checks, and they matter far more than the ones your doctor writes down. Number 4 is the one that will surprise you because most people have it exactly backward. My name is Walter. I'm 82 years old and I've lived alone in this house in Maine since I lost my wife Helen 7 years ago. Maybe you've been wondering lately how you're actually doing. Not your blood pressure, you. Whether you're holding your own or whether something's been quietly slipping. It's a hard thing to ask about yourself, and there's nobody to ask. And so most people just carry the worry around unexamined. So let's take the 5 in order, starting now. And stay with me through number 4. That's the one where nearly everybody scores themselves wrong, including me for about 75 years. The first one, you can still be surprised. That's it. That's the whole test. Somewhere in the last month, did you find something out that changed how you look at something else? It sounds small. It isn't. A mind that can still be surprised is a mind that's still open. And a mind that can't be is one that's finished sorting the world and closed the file. And the second kind can happen at 50 as easily as at 90. I've known men who were done learning at 45 and men still going at 91. Mine came late. I was 76. My granddaughter Lily left a book on that kitchen table about the bedrock under this coast, the stone in the wall out back, the ice that shaped this land. I'd built houses on that ground for 45 years and never once wondered what was under it. I read the whole thing in 2 evenings. 80 years walking around on top of a world I knew nothing about, and nobody had ever mentioned it was interesting. And what it did wasn't just fill 2 evenings, it changed the walk. That stone wall on the north line, I'd been putting stones back in it every spring for 50 years and never once wondered where they came from. Now I know. And the walk is better for it every time, which is what surprise actually does for you. It doesn't just add a fact. It goes back and makes ordinary things you've looked at your whole life worth looking at again. That's why this one is first. It costs nothing. It requires no ability you might have lost. You can do it sitting in a chair, and it quietly pays into all 4 of the others. If something did that to you this month, you're fine. That's number 1. If you're walking this road alone, subscribe to this channel so you don't have to walk it alone. All right, number 2, the second one, you can still change your mind about a person. I want to be careful with how I put this because it's the one I find hardest to talk about honestly. By the time you get to my age, you've made your assessments. You've had 80 years to decide who's decent and who isn't, who can be trusted, who let you down and when. And those verdicts feel like knowledge. They don't feel like opinions you formed once and never revisited. They feel like facts about the world, as settled as the weather. Most of them were formed a very long time ago, on partial information, by a younger version of you who was often wrong. And here's the thing I'd want anybody to understand. The ability to reopen one of those files is one of the truest signs that a mind is still working. Not to reverse it necessarily, just to be capable of looking at it again. A man who cannot revise a single judgment he made in 1974 is a man whose mind has stopped being a mind and started being a filing cabinet. Mine was a fellow named Gerald, married to Helen's sister Margaret. I sat across a holiday table from that man for 40 years, and I did not like him, and I had good reasons. He was what I'd call a diminishing man. He had a way of finding the thing you were proudest of and pressing on it, politely until it was smaller. He did it to me. He did it to Margaret. He did it to my son David one Thanksgiving about the work David was doing, and that was the one time in 40 years I said something to him about it. So that was my verdict. Filed in about 1968 and never once reopened. Gerald is an unpleasant man, and I will be civil to him at holidays, and that is the extent of it. Then he died, and in the year or 2 after, Margaret told me some things about him, about his own father, about what had been done to him as a boy, long before I ever met him. Things she'd known for 50 years and had never had reason to say to me. And I couldn't do anything with that. He was dead. There was no putting it right. But I could sit in this chair and understand, for the first time at about 79 years of age, that the man I'd spent 4 decades defending myself against had been made that way by somebody else, and that the whole time I was reading him as a threat, he was mostly just damage walking around in a good jacket. That didn't make what he did all right. I want to be clear about that. But I'd had one file open on Gerald for 40 years, and it turned out to be about a third of the story, and I only found that out because I was still willing to look. Now I want to say what this cost me, because that's the part that makes it worth putting on the list. 40 years I sat at those tables braced. There's no other word for it. From the moment I came through the door to the moment we got in the truck, some part of me was watching Gerald and waiting. And that watching was not free. It cost me the room. I was never entirely present at any gathering that man was in, because a portion of me was always on duty, and there were a lot of those gatherings over 4 decades, and there were people I actually loved in every one of them. That's what a closed file does. It isn't just an opinion sitting there harmlessly. It's a standing instruction to your attention, and it runs whether you think about it or not. And it takes something from every room the person is in. I'm not going to tell you I'd have liked him if I'd known sooner. I probably wouldn't have. But I'd have been braced differently. The way you brace against weather instead of against an enemy. And that's a considerably cheaper way to get through a holiday. Here's what I'd ask you. Is there anybody in your life you've been wrong about? And has that possibility crossed your mind in the last few years? Even once? Not that you've forgiven them. Not that you've done anything about it. Just that you can still entertain the idea that your version might not be the whole of it. If you can, you're doing better than most people at any age. Before the next one, tell me in the comments how long you've been on your own. Just the number, if that's all you want to say. And tell me how many of these 5 you're still checking off, because I've a feeling most of you are doing better than you think. I read every single one, and I answer as many as these old hands allow. And if this is helping you, that thumbs up tells YouTube to show it to somebody else sitting alone tonight. Number 3, the third one, you can still be bad at something. Not tolerate being bad at something. Be bad at it, voluntarily, in front of other people, if it comes to that. This is the one I'd never have thought of at 60, and that I now think is close to the center of the whole business of aging well. So let me take my time with it. Here's what happens to a man over a long working life. You get good at things. That's the whole arc of it. You start out knowing nothing, you're incompetent for a good stretch, and then somewhere in your 30s you start being genuinely capable. And by 50, you're one of the people who knows how. And that becomes your position in the world. Walter knows wood. Ask Walter about a sill. That's not vanity, that's just what a working life produces. And then it becomes very hard to be a beginner again, because being a beginner means being visibly incompetent, and you haven't been visibly incompetent at anything since about 1968. And some part of you has quietly decided that being seen not knowing how is a thing that happens to other people now. So you stop trying things. Not consciously, you just find that you only do what you're already good at, and the circle of what you'll attempt gets a little smaller each year, and by 75 a man can have narrowed his entire life down to the 4 or 5 activities where he's guaranteed not to look foolish. That's a comfortable way to live, and it is the beginning of the end. I found this out over a stove. Helen did the cooking. 54 years. That was the arrangement, and it worked, and I never questioned it. I could put together breakfast, and that was the whole of my range. When she died, I was 75 years old, and I had to learn to cook or eat badly for whatever was left. And for about the first year, I was genuinely terrible at it. I want to be specific, because I think people gloss over this part. I ruined meat. I made a stew you could have used to patch a roof. I set off the smoke alarm at least 4 times, and this house is a mile from anything, so the alarm was purely for my own information. There was a chicken in that first winter I would rather not discuss. And every one of those failures happened in an empty kitchen with nobody watching. And I still felt like a fool every time. That's the part worth noticing. There was no audience. Nobody was going to know. And a 75-year-old man was still embarrassed in front of himself, which tells you how deep the thing runs. But I kept at it because the alternative was cereal at the counter for the rest of my life. And somewhere in the second year, I made a pot roast that I would have been pleased to put in front of anybody. And I'm now a decent plain cook. Not a good one, decent. Which is a thing I became after the age of 75, which I would have told you was impossible at 74. Then, at about the same time, I did it again with plumbing. Hired plumbers my whole working life, because I was a carpenter, and that was somebody else's trade. On a fixed income at 74, with more time than money, I sat down with a book and some of the things Lily showed me on her computer and learned to do the basic work myself. Badly at first. There was an afternoon involving a cellar and a shutoff valve that I'll spare you. I can do it now. Not to a professional standard. Well enough. That's the part worth noticing. There was no audience. Nobody was going to know. And a 75-year-old man was still embarrassed in front of himself, which tells you how deep the thing runs. And I'll tell you what I actually had to get past, because it wasn't the cooking. Every time I ruined something, the same thought arrived. Helen would have done this without thinking about it. 54 years she put a supper on that table every night and never once made a production of it. And here I was at 75 with a smoking pan and a chicken I'd have been ashamed to serve to a dog. So the failure wasn't just failure, it was failure against the standard of somebody who'd been extraordinary at the thing and who wasn't there to ask, and who I was missing every minute I stood at her stove. That's the harder version of being a beginner, and I suspect a lot of people listening know exactly what I mean. You're not just learning a thing badly, you're learning it badly in the place where somebody who was good at it used to stand. What got me through was something Susan said on a Thursday call in that first year when I told her about the stew. She said, "Pop, Mom was bad at it too," in 1964. And I hadn't thought about that once. Of course she was. She was 26 years old and she'd learned from her mother the way people did. And there must have been 100 meals in that first decade that didn't work. And I have absolutely no memory of any of them. All I had was the finished woman, 50 years of competence, and I was measuring myself against a thing that took her half a lifetime to build. Nobody is born knowing how. We just don't get to watch the part where the good ones were bad. And so we grade ourselves against a version of them that never existed. If you're standing in somebody's kitchen or somebody's workshop or somebody's garden trying to do a thing they used to do, you are not failing. You're at the beginning of a road they walked 40 years ago and you never saw the start of it. So here's the test, and it's an easy one to run on yourself. When did you last do something you were bad at? Not something difficult that you're good at. Something you were genuinely no good at, that you kept doing anyway until you were less bad. Because a person who's still willing to be a beginner has kept the one capacity that makes the rest of life possible. Everything you'll need to learn from here, and there will be things, there always are, depends on being able to stand there not knowing how. The men I've watched go downhill fastest were not the sick ones. They were the ones who stopped attempting anything they might do poorly. That circle closes fast once it starts. And it closes quietly, which is the trouble. Nobody announces that they've stopped trying new things. There's no day you decide it. You just notice, if you ever look, that you haven't started anything in 4 years, that everything currently in your life is something you were already doing in 2019. That's a thing worth checking about yourself once in a while, and it takes about a minute. Run down what you do in a week. How much of it did you start after you turned 70? If the answer is nothing, that's not a character flaw, and I'm not scolding anybody. It's just a circle that's closed and hasn't been noticed. And the way you open it is not to take up something ambitious. It's to pick one thing you'd be bad at and be bad at it on purpose and keep at it past the part where it's embarrassing. We're coming up on number 4 now. The one I said almost everybody gets backward. The 4th one, you can still let somebody help you. I know. I know exactly how that lands because it landed the same way on me. Everything about the way we talk about aging says the opposite. Independence is the prize. Still driving, still in the house, still doing his own yard. Doesn't need anybody. That's the story every one of us tells about the old people we admire. And it's the story I told about myself for a very long time. And it is, at best, half right. Here's what I've come to think instead. Needing help is not the failure. Needing help is arithmetic. You get old enough. You need help. That's the whole of it. and there's no getting around it, and everyone who has ever lived and got old has arrived at the same place. The failure is not being able to accept it. And those are entirely different conditions, and we've got them so thoroughly confused that men will do genuinely dangerous things rather than be helped. David wanted to put a grab bar in the shower. He'd been raising it gently for the better part of a year, the way he raises everything with me, leaving room for me to say no so I never feel handled. And I said no, repeatedly. And I gave reasons, and the reasons were all perfectly sound. I don't need it. I've been getting in and out of that shower since 1971. I'm steady enough. Save your money. None of that was the actual reason. The actual reason was that I did not want a grab bar in my shower, because a grab bar in the shower is a thing that is in an old man's shower, and I was not prepared to be a man with one of those in his house. That's it. That was the whole objection. Vanity in a bathroom, with nobody to see it but me. He put it in eventually, came up one weekend with it in the truck and didn't make an occasion of it, just did it while I was out in the shop. And by the time I came in, it was done, and there was nothing to argue about. And I use it every single day, and I have never once thought about it since. And the difference between the man who refused it for a year and the man who uses it without a thought is nothing at all, except that one of them had to get over himself. Now, I want to say the honest part, because I think the reason we all resist this is real and doesn't get named. What you're actually defending isn't your independence, it's your position. For your whole adult life, you were the one who did things for other people. I raised 4 siblings starting at 23 when my father died. I supported a family for 45 years. I was the man people called when something needed fixing on this road. That was my place in the world, and I liked it, and I was good at it. And accepting help means the arrow turns around. You become the one who's done for. And that feels, I'll use the plain word, it feels like a demotion. Like you've been moved from the people who give to the people who receive. And everybody knows which of those is the better position to be in. That's the part that's wrong, and it took me until about 79 to see it, because I'd been on the other end of it. Every one of those years I spent doing for other people, fixing the Sullivan's porch, taking soup down the road to Dot, planning a door for a woman at the church whose husband used to do that sort of thing. Every one of those, I was not thinking anything about their position, not once. I wasn't keeping score. I was glad to be asked, and I liked being useful, and being asked was the good part of my week. So when I refuse David, what am I actually doing? I'm telling my son that he doesn't get the thing I got for 50 years, the pleasure of being useful to somebody he loves. I'm protecting my own standing at his expense. And when I put it that way, it stops looking like dignity and starts looking like exactly what it is, which is pride wearing a work shirt. There's a second cost to refusing, and it's larger than the first, and it doesn't show up for years. When you turn people down enough times, they stop offering, not out of any hard feeling, they just learn. People are quick about that. Offer 3 times, get refused 3 times, and a reasonable person concludes that Walter doesn't want help and stops putting you in the position of having to say no again. That's not abandonment, that's courtesy. But the arithmetic of it is brutal, because the offers stop arriving years before you actually need them. So you spend 75 to 82 teaching everyone around you that you're not to be helped, and then somewhere past 85 something happens where you genuinely cannot manage. And by then, the habit is set on both sides. They've stopped asking. You've never once practiced saying yes. And the first time in your life you have to accept real help is the time when it's urgent and frightening and there's no room to be graceful about it. I've watched that go badly. Men who could have had a slow, dignified handing over across 10 years instead had it happen to them in a week in a hospital, with decisions being made in a corridor by people who love them and are frightened. The way to avoid that is to say yes early, to accept help you don't strictly need, while it's still small and cheap, and you're still the one deciding. The grab bar I fought for a year is exactly that. I didn't need it in any urgent sense, and I probably still don't. But taking it was practice. It kept the channel open. It told my son that offering me things is not a losing proposition, so he goes on offering. And that means when it stops being optional, I'll already know how. Accepting help is a skill, and it does not appear from nowhere at 88. You build it in your 70s on things that don't matter much, or you don't have it when it counts. The test here is simple, and most people fail it. When somebody offers to do something for you, can you say yes without a fight? Without the 3 reasons why you don't need it. Without paying them back within the week so the books are square. That last one is worth sitting with, because it's the version of the failure that looks like good manners. I did it for years, and I'd have told you I was being decent. Somebody does me a turn, and within a few days, I'm at their door with a repaired thing, or a cutting board, or a jar of something. And it looks generous and feels generous, and underneath it is a man who cannot stand to be carrying a debt. Helen used to point that out, gently. She'd say I couldn't let anybody do anything for me without evening it up, and I'd say that's just how I was raised, and she'd let it go the way she let things go, which was never entirely. She was right. A relationship where nothing is ever owed in either direction is not close. It's balanced, which is a different thing, and it's how you stay polite with somebody for 30 years without ever getting anywhere. The people I'm actually close to now are the ones I owe things to, and who owe things to me, and neither of us is counting. Elaine down the road has a key to this house. I have one to hers. Neither of us has ever mentioned squaring anything, and I'd guess neither of us could say who's ahead, and that not knowing is most of what makes it what it is. So the harder version of the test isn't whether you can accept help. It's whether you can accept it and then let it sit there, unpaid, for as long as it takes. And there's a piece of this I'd add, because I don't want it heard as pure surrender. Accepting help is not the same as handing over the reins. I take the grab bar. I do not go up on the roof anymore. That one I gave up at 78, and I've held to it. But I split my own wood, I keep my own accounts, I cook every meal I eat, and I intend to go on doing those until I can't. The line I use now isn't, can I still do this? It's what does it cost me to be wrong? Wrong about a ladder at 82 means lying in a yard in November and nobody coming by until Tuesday. Wrong about a round of ash means I put the maul down and go inside, tired. Same stubbornness, applied with some arithmetic. That's number 4. Independence where it's cheap to be wrong, help where it isn't. And no pride in either direction, because pride has never once made an old man safer. The 5th one, you can still look forward to something small. This is the last one, and it's the quietest. And I've put it last because I think it's the one that actually holds a life up at the end. Not something big, that's the point. At 82, there isn't much big left in front of me, and I've made my peace with that. I'm not waiting on a promotion or a wedding or a first house. The question is whether there's anything at all out ahead of you, however small, that you're glad is coming. Because that's what a future is when you get down to it. Not plans, not years, just the presence of something ahead that you'd rather not miss. And I want to be clear that I'm not talking about optimism. I've never been much of an optimist, and I'm not going to start at 82. This is a smaller and more mechanical thing than optimism. It's just whether the future contains any item at all that you'd rather be present for. Mine tonight is a drawer. There's a small chest of drawers on the bench out there that I'm making for Susan, and she doesn't know about it, and I fitted the second drawer this afternoon. Took 3 tries. Cut the groove a hair shallow on the first one, and had to start over on a piece of cherry I'd been saving, which is the kind of thing that would have had me swearing at 50, and now just means an extra hour in a warm shop with nowhere else to be. Got it right on the 3rd, and stood there about 4 seconds being as pleased as a man can reasonably be about a drawer. There's a 3rd one to fit in the morning, and I am looking forward to it. Not in any large way. But when I bank this fire and go up those stairs tonight, there will be a thing waiting on the other side of the sleep that I'm glad about. That's the whole test. Is there anything on the other side of tonight's sleep that you're glad about? And I'd say don't answer that one too fast, in either direction. Some people will say, of course, and mean the grandchildren at Christmas, which is 4 months off and doesn't count for this. I'm asking about tomorrow, this week, something close enough that you can see it from here. And I'll tell you why I take it so seriously. In that second winter after Helen died, I could not have answered it, not once for months. I'd go up to bed and there was nothing on the other side, just another one of the same day. arriving whether I wanted it or not. That's the condition, more than the sadness, that I'd call the real trouble. Sadness is heavy, but it's still weather. A person with nothing ahead of them has stopped having a future while still being alive. And that's a different and worse thing. It came back small. That's the part worth saying. It did not come back as hope or purpose or any of the large words. It came back as a chickadee. 2nd January, the feeder had sat empty 4 months because filling it had been Helen's job. And one morning there was a chickadee sitting on the empty thing, just waiting, and I put my coat on and went out in the cold and filled it. And he came back within the hour, and he came back the next morning. And within a week, the last thing I thought before I slept was that he'd be there when it got light. That's all it was, a bird at a feeder. And it was the first thing in 5 months that was on the other side of a night. And everything I've got now, the drawers, the Saturday diner, the letter that's due back from Lily any day, all of it grew out of that. And I've thought a good deal about why something that small was able to do that much. Because on the face of it, a bird at a feeder is nothing. I think it's because a small thing is the only kind you can actually believe in when you're in that condition. If somebody had come to me in that second winter and told me I had good years ahead, that there'd be a life again, that I'd be all right, I'd have nodded and not believed a word of it, because from inside that winter, it wasn't credible. It was too big a claim. There was no evidence for it, and I had no way to test it. But a chickadee at a feeder at first light is a claim small enough to be checked. He either shows up or he doesn't. And he did the next morning and the morning after that, and each time some very small part of the machinery went, that was true. The thing I expected happened. Do that a few hundred times and something rebuilds. Not hope exactly. More like the basic working assumption that tomorrow is a real place where things occur. Which sounds absurd to say out loud, and which you lose entirely for a while, and which has to be put back one verified small thing at a time. That's why I'd tell you to start small. Not because small is all you deserve, because small is what's believable, and believable is what actually works. So if you can't answer the question tonight, don't go looking for something large. Find one small thing and put it on the far side of the sleep. A bird, a bread that needs to come out, a letter you're expecting, a drawer. It works. I have no idea why it works. It worked on me. That's the 5. You can still be surprised. You can still change your mind about a person. You can still be bad at something. You can still let somebody help you. And you can still look forward to something small. Now, and I'd guess most of you scored better than you expected. I'd also guess one of them landed wrong, and you know which one it was because you felt it while I was talking about it. That's the one worth your attention. Not all 5. The one that stung. And I want to say the honest thing before I let you go, because I don't want any of this heard as a report card from a man who's got it all in hand. I failed number 4 for about 75 years. I couldn't have answered number 5 for most of a winter. There are still mornings when I'm exactly the man who'd rather do it wrong alone than do it right with help. And I catch it now mostly, and I didn't used to catch it at all. None of these 5 are things you have or don't have. They're all things you can lose in a quiet year and get back in a slower one. That's the only real news I've got tonight, and it's better news than it sounds. Because notice what isn't on this list. Nothing about your knees. Nothing about what you weigh or what your numbers were at the last appointment or how far you can walk without stopping. I'm not saying those don't matter. They matter and you should look after them, and I'm not the man to advise you about any of it. But they're not what I've been watching in the men I've known who got old well and the men who didn't. I've buried friends who were fit as a fiddle at 78 and had gone closed and hard in small years before their bodies gave out. And I've sat with Dot down the road, who's 91 and can barely get across her own kitchen, and who is one of the most alive people I know, still curious, still funny, still changing her mind about things, still glad about Sunday because she knows I'm coming. The body does what it does, and most of it isn't up to you. These 5 mostly are. That's the whole reason I picked them. I'm 82 years old, alone in this house at the end of a long driveway, in a cold part of the country. And by these 5, I'm doing all right, which I could not have said at 76, and which took a good deal longer to arrive than anybody warned me. So run the 5 on yourself before you go. You can still be surprised. You can still change your mind about somebody. You can still be bad at something. You can still let somebody help you. And you can still look forward to something small. Take the one that stung. Just that one. Not this year, this week, now. If it was number 5 that landed wrong, if you got to that question about the other side of the sleep and came up empty, and you've been sitting with that since, I made another talk about exactly that, about what actually fills a day when there's nobody else in the house, what I put in mine, in what proportions, and why I leave part of it deliberately empty, and how a man got from that second winter, with nothing at all on the far side of a night, to one who's genuinely looking forward to fitting a drawer in the morning. It's right there on the screen. Go on over whenever you're ready, tonight or whenever it's one of the harder ones. The fire's still going here. The kettle's still warm. I'll see you there.